Chapter 8, Notable Proponents, deep dive into 2 to 3 famous followers who expanded the theory. Plato's philosophy did not end with his dialogues or with the Academy's seat of learning. It was reborn, refracted, and expanded many times over by those who came after him, especially in late antiquity, when the currents of thought, mystical, metaphysical, mathematical, and religious, began to fuse with the master's republics and forms. This chapter looks at 3 famous followers who did more than study Plato. They systematized, extended, and sometimes transformed his project into a robust metaphysical architecture. They are Plotinus, Porphyry, and Proclus. Together, they form a corridor of Platonic influence, one that moves from theoria to theurgy, from the ascent of the soul to the ascent of the cosmos, from the careful discipline of dialectic to the disciplined life of contemplation. In their hands, Platonic theory becomes a living, hierarchical cosmos, where the good is not merely the form that illumines all forms but the source of all emanation, causation, and meaning. Plotinus, the One as source, the soul as return, the nous as mirror. Life and context. Plotinus, c. 205–270 CE, grew up in a world where Greek philosophy was braided with Eastern religious sensibilities. Born in Lycopolis, in Egypt, he traveled and studied first in Alexandria, the great crossroads of Hellenic thought, before settling in Rome, where his ideas circulated in the form of lectures and discussions. Though his life was not long, his influence was expansive. His student Porphyry collected and edited his lectures into the Enneads, converting a living school into a cohesive, transmissible system. Plotinus did not merely interpret Plato, he transformed Plato's dualists, the sensible and the intelligible, into a 3-tiered metaphysical universe, and he infused that universe with a spiritual psychology and a mystic longing that would shape Christian, Islamic, and Jewish thought for centuries. Core ideas and contribution. At the center of Plotinus's philosophy is a triadic structure, the One, the intellect, nous, and the world soul, world nous and the soul. The One stands beyond being and naming, yet it is the source of all existence. Out of this ultimate simplicity emanates the nous, a realm of perfect forms, Plato's forms extended and systematized, and from the nous emanates the world soul, which animates the cosmos and breathes life into each level of reality. The material world, though real as a functioning, intelligible cosmos, derives its contingency and multiplicity from the processes of emanation and return. Several features of Plotinus's extension of Plato deserve emphasis. Emanation as a constructive process. Unlike a creator who sits apart from creation, Plotinus describes reality as a cascade of emanations from the One. The One's simplicity is so profound that it cannot be named or grasped in full by ordinary intellect, yet from the One flows the nous, from the nous the world soul, and then the material world. The language is not mere metaphor, it is a metaphysical economy. Unity begets unity, and multiplicity is the son of unity's overflow. The nous as the living order of being. The nous contains the eternal forms in a living, knowable structure. It is the divine mind in which all intelligible realities exist in a completed and perfect state. The forms are not separate from this mind, they are its intelligible content, the ideal exemplars by which we discern order in the sensible world. The soul and the ascent of the self. The individual soul participates in the world soul and seeks release from illusion through contemplation. The philosopher is someone who has learned to focus the soul's attention on what is truly real, namely, the heavenly intelligibles, until the soul's gaze can once again return toward the One. Return as fulfillment. The human soul's aim is not conquest of an external law but a return to its source. This is not annihilation, but purification, a narrowing of the field of attachment, a cleansing of passions, and a purification of perception so that the soul beholds the One indirectly by means of the highest levels of reality. In Plotinus, philosophy is a path of ascent, a discipline of turning away from sensory distraction toward re-illumination by the good and true. Aesthetics and love. Plotinus roots the longing for beauty in the soul's desire to know the good. Beautiful things, whether a painting, a melody, or a well-ordered argument, function as pointers toward higher realities. Love, eros, is thus a spiritual mechanism. It binds the seeker to what is good and moves the soul toward unity with the divine source. Impact and legacy. Plotinus's system is, in many ways, the architecture of Neoplatonism. It provides a rigorous framework that reconciles Plato's emphasis on transcendent forms with a mystical, experimental approach to philosophy. The Enneads became a touchstone for later thinkers who wished to preserve Platonic fidelity in a world that was increasingly religiously plural and philosophically resourceful. Christian theologians, such as Augustine, absorbed Platonian motifs, the ascent of the soul, the triadic structure, the primacy of the good, the contemplative life, and wove them into Christian metaphysics. Islamic and Jewish philosophers would also draw on Platonian ideas in their own exegeses of Plato and the Bible, using emanation, hierarchy, and a teleology of return to articulate their own theologies. Porphyry, biography, the isagoge, and the tree of being. Life and context. Porphyry of Tyre, c. 234–305 CE, was a pupil of Plotinus and a prolific writer who helped transmit and translate Neoplatonism to later generations. He wrote the Life of Plotinus, an important biographical source that shapes our understanding of Plotinus's teaching, and he edited and organized Plotinus's scattered lectures into a systematized form. Porphyry's own writings straddle philosophy, religion, and polemic, and his influence on the structure of intellectual life in late antiquity was profound. He is often credited with making Neoplatonism portable, bridging the austerity of philosophical argument with the pious, multidisciplinary culture of the time. Core ideas and contribution. Isagoge, the Isagoge, Introduction, is Porphyry's most famous short work, especially because it served as an accessible entry point for Aristotle's categories for medieval readers. In it, he presents a compact primer on the categories and the logical scaffolding of being. The Isagoge did not simply teach terminology, it prepared a pathway to engage with Plato through Aristotelian categories, thus making the Neoplatonist framework legible to later scholastics who would inherit, translate, and transform it. The Tree of Porphyry, perhaps his best-known image, the tree is a pedagogical diagram that organizes real being into a hierarchical structure, genus, species, difference. This visual aid became a standard mnemonic in the medieval curriculum for illustrating how particulars are related to universal categories. It is a practical tool, but it also encodes a metaphysical stance. Reality is structured, intelligible, and gradational. The tree's logic is not merely taxonomic, it reinforces the Neoplatonist conviction that rises and falls in levels of reality mirror an overarching, intelligible unity. The Life of Plotinus and Ethical Polemics. Porphyry's Life of Plotinus preserved the testimony of a master and thus anchored Plotinus's authority for generations. Beyond biography, Porphyry conducted philosophical polemics and exegetical work that sought to harmonize philosophy with religious life while defending philosophy against rival religious frameworks, particularly in its early Christian engagements. He was neither a naive mystic nor a secularist. He was a philosopher deeply concerned with how human beings might live in alignment with rationally discerned truth. Synthesis and influence. Porphyry's work helped fuse the Platonic tradition with other strands of thought, especially Stoicism and Pythagorean mysticism, while preserving the central Neoplatonist conviction that hierarchy, order, and a meaningful cosmos stem from a single source. He also anticipated some later Christian doctrinal methods, the idea of a rational, illuminated path for the soul, the importance of spiritual discipline, and the possibility of aligning human life with cosmic wisdom. Impact and legacy. Porphyry's influence lies as much in his method as in his content. The Isagoge became a standard gateway to philosophical and theological inquiry in both the Islamic and Christian worlds. His Life of Plotinus and his interpretive work ensured that Plotinus's ideas would survive as a living tradition rather than a mere historical curiosity. The Tree of Porphyry offered a model for how to teach and think about being, not a random collection of traits and entities, but a coherent ascent from the particular to the universal. In Christian scholasticism and Jewish philosophy, Porphyry's insistence on rational critique and his method of categorization helped shape debates about creation, causation, and the relationship between God and the world. He stood at the hinge between philosophy as a living, practical discipline and philosophy as a theological enterprise. Proclus, the systematizer of the Platonic cosmos. Life and context. Proclus Lysias, c. 412–485 CE, became perhaps the most ambitious late antique philosopher. He rose to the leadership of the Platonic Academy in Athens, wrote more extensively than any of his predecessors, and composed commentaries on almost all of Plato's dialogues. His work is a monumental attempt to present a coherent, fully developed Platonist system that could stand as a rival to any rival metaphysical system in antiquity. He did not merely interpret Plato, he reimagined him as a grand metaphysical science, a science of the divine order that included oracles, hymns, and ritual practices in a fully philosophical frame. Proclus is often described as the last of the ancient philosophers, and in him one finds the culmination of the classical Platonic project before its medieval reinvention. Core ideas and contribution. The Elements of Theology, Proclus's best known and most influential work, The Elements, or Elements of Theology, presents a flawless, densely argued system of the Platonic cosmos. It is a compendious, almost iconic map of how being, good, and the various levels of reality relate to one another. The text enumerates 100 theses that describe the nature of God, the One, and the emanation through nous to the world soul and down to the material world, offering a precise, numerically resonant account of how unity yields multiplicity. A hierarchical cosmos and the chain of being, for Proclus, reality unfolds along a rigorous hierarchy. The One remains beyond being, yet from it emanates the good, the divine intellect, nous, the world soul, and the cosmos. Gods, daemons, and celestial powers populate the ladder, and the entire universe participates in a living order governed by the rational and the divine. This is not abstraction for its own sake, it is a metaphysical map intended to help the practitioner locate the soul's path upward and the rituals that assist its ascent. Theurgy and the philosophic life. Although Iamblichus popularized theurgical practice as a form of ritual elevation, Proclus embraced a version of it that sat within the rational, speculative framework of Platonism. He did not surrender to magic or superstition, rather, he argued that rituals, aligned with philosophical understanding, could assist the soul in bridging the human with the divine in an intelligible and meaningful way. Theurgy, for Proclus, is the practice that makes the ascent not merely possible but intelligible within a coherent metaphysical system. The unity of philosophy and religion. Proclus's project is notable for refusing to separate philosophy from religion. He insists that true philosophy must answer the deepest questions about the origin of the cosmos, the nature of divinity, and the place of humanity within the divine order. His works are dense with references to Egyptian and Chaldean sources, showing a cosmopolitan attempt to synthesize diverse streams of ancient wisdom into a single, intelligible structure. Impact and legacy. Proclus's influence radiates outward in two directions. First, his systematic approach became a template for medieval and early modern metaphysics. Second, his insistence on a living cosmos governed by order, intelligibility, and ritual duty helped sustain the idea that the practice of philosophy could be a form of spiritual discipline. In the Islamic world, in particular, and later in Christian scholastic circles, Proclus's syncretic method and his expansive cosmology fed into debates about the nature of God, creation, unity, and the structure of being. His idea of a cosmos alive with divine intelligence helped shape medieval cosmological and theological imagery, angelic hierarchies, the correspondence of numbers and realities, and the sense that philosophy could serve as both science and sacrament. A shared horizon, what these proponents did to Plato. Three figures, Plotinus, Porphyry, Proclus, offer a comprehensive, if distinct, expansion of Plato's theory. They did not merely interpret the master, they reimagined his system for a world undergoing its own transformations. They each brought a metaphysical architecture to Plato's forms. What began as a theory of abstract, perfect templates for sensible objects grew into a universe structured by levels, emanations, and final causes. The forms were not confined to the intelligible realm but embedded in a dynamic cosmos that gives birth to all levels of reality. Translated a philosophy of intuited unity into a philosophy of cosmic order. Their insistence on hierarchy did not reduce reality to a blind monism. Rather, unity was the source of multiplicity, and multiplicity was meaningful only insofar as it reflected a principled order. Made philosophy a totalizing discipline that seeks union with the good and the divine. The ascent of the soul was not a private, interior mood but a disciplined practice with cognitive, ethical, and ritual dimensions. In Plotinus, Porphyry, and Proclus, philosophy is not only a set of arguments but a way of life aimed at participation in a larger reality. Shaped later religious and philosophical traditions. Their work formed a bridge from antiquity to medieval thought. Christian theologians, Islamic philosophers, Jewish scholastics, and even some Renaissance thinkers drew on their ideas, often reinterpreting them through the lens of their own religious commitments. The one became a crucible for theological reflection, emanation and hierarchy supplied vocabulary for debates about God, creation, and the nature of humanity. Critical perspectives and tensions. As compelling as their synthesis is, it is not without tensions. The Neoplatonists, in their attempt to harmonize philosophy with religious life, sometimes risked sacrificing a strict, demonstrative method for a more mystical or ritualized approach. Critics, ancient and modern, often raise questions such as the problem of unity and multiplicity. If all is emanated from the one, how do we account for genuine novelty and historical contingency? The Neoplatonists answer with a robust hierarchy and a teleology of return, but the tension between unity and the apparent variety of existence remains a focal philosophical challenge. Evil and the problem of the good. For Plotinus, evil is not a substance but a privation or a departure from the good. This can be a powerful solution within a metaphysical frame, yet it prompts further questions about moral responsibility, suffering, and the scope of cosmic providence. The role of ritual and theurgical practice. Proclus's openness to ritual and mediation with divine powers raises questions about the place of philosophy as rigorous inquiry. Is philosophy truly ascetic and contemplative, or must it be complemented by ritual action? The answer varies by thinker and context, but the tension is a recurrent theme in late antique thought. The relationship to Aristotle and the broader tradition. Porphyry's isagoge and his other work sought to make Aristotle's categories compatible with Plato's theory. This project of synthesis is fruitful but never fully exhausted. It leaves room for ongoing reinterpretations of the Platonic legacy in a world that is increasingly plural in its philosophical allegiances. Closing reflection, a living lineage. Chapter 8 has traced a thread from Plato's Academy into the bustling, multicultural world of late antiquity. Plotinus, Porphyry, and Proclus did not simply pass along a Platonic doctrine, they reimagined it, recast it, and extended it into a cosmology that could articulate science, in the broad sense of systematic knowledge, ethics, and spiritual practice in one overarching vision. They created a living tradition in which philosophy and religion are not strangers but kin, each sustaining the other's life. In a broader arc, their work carried Plato's unending challenge, to see beyond appearances, to discern order within multiplicity, and to seek the kind of unity that makes life meaningful. Their response, an ascent through a cosmos of intelligible realities, a disciplined life of contemplation, and a sense of divine friendship with the cosmos, has echoed through the centuries. It shaped medieval soteriology and metaphysics, it undergirded significant streams of Islamic philosophy and Christian thought, and it continues, in different forms, to animate contemporary debates about the nature of reality, the scope of knowledge, and the possibility of human transformation. If Plato's Republic offered a city in speech and idea, Plotinus, Porphyry, and Proclus gave us a city in being, the city of a cosmos whose architecture is intelligible, whose heights invite ascent, and whose depths call forth a longing to know the good. The portrait of the philosopher that emerges from their work is not merely one of argument and school, it is a portrait of a life oriented toward the unity that binds mind to reality, soul to source, and human longing to the source of all beauty and truth. In that sense, these notable proponents are not just followers of a doctrine, they are interpreters of a living vision, that philosophy, at its best, is a sacred practice of returning to the One through the luminous path of the forms, the soul, and the cosmos. Endnotes for further exploration, suggested reading list. Plotinus, Enneads. The central primary text for understanding the One, Nous, and the world soul, and the ethical and mystical dimensions of Platinian philosophy. Porphyry, Isagoge, Introduction. A compact gateway into Aristotelian categories reframed in a Platonic-motivated system, the Tree of Porphyry is a classic aid to pedagogy in late antiquity. Porphyry, Life of Plotinus. A key biographical source illuminating Plotinus's doctrine as it was lived and taught. Proclus, Elements of Theology. A compact, definitive presentation of Proclean metaphysics, including the hierarchical cosmos, the good, and the role of the divine in creation and knowledge. Proclus, The Theology of Plato. A fuller exposé of the late antique Platonic synthesis, including his views on ritual philosophy and the unity of philosophy with religious practice. As you turn from Plotinus's contemplative ascent to Porphyry's educational synthesis and Proclus's ceremonial metaphysical system, the Platonic project reveals itself not as a static body of conclusions but as a living, expanding conversation, one that invites each new reader to participate in the ongoing work of understanding the real, the good, and the beautiful, in a cosmos that is more intelligible the more we learn to love and contemplate it.